There is an entitlement epidemic in the West. We're originally from Australia, but this is all over the Western world. There is a generation of children that are growing up right now that feel like they deserve things because they exist on this planet. And I really felt like our kids were going the same way. And as a lot of you guys know who watch this channel regularly, we sold everything we owned. We packed up our bags and we left on a journey to Southeast Asia. It's been 2 years now. We finally settled down and we have no intention of going back anytime soon. Part of the reason we left in the first place was obviously cost of living. I've spoken about that a lot. The cost of living in the Western world is just getting absolutely crazy. And we didn't want to be a part of that. I also didn't want to be part of the 9 to 5 meat grinder that exists, slowly grinding families to death. But one of the main triggers was actually something my oldest child said to me about 3 years ago, about a year before we started traveling, that actually made it go from we're thinking about traveling to now we have to do it for our kids. And that's what I want to talk about today. So for those who don't know who I am, my name is Jimmy, and I am 1/4 of the Mitches on the Horizon family, and my wife and my 2 children and myself, we, like I said, packed our bags, sold everything we owned, and we're traveling around Southeast Asia. And we've actually decided to make Penang our home. And if you want to learn more about that journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Okay, so let me rewind back to 3 years ago. And this is pretty crazy when I think about it, that this was the status quo of our kids, considering what they're like now. And I'll talk about how travel has affected our children. And I'm going to talk about how traveling as a family has affected our children in a second. But I want to give you a little bit of context to why we left in the first place and why we decided that it was a necessity to go after I heard this. So our kids went to a pretty decent school. We were in a nice neighborhood in Australia. Obviously, I've mentioned before, we were struggling. We were just grinding away the 9 to 5 grind, struggling away. But we lived in a reasonably nice area, safe suburb, and our kids went to a nice school. Now, the problem with our kids going to a nice school is that the kids that they went to school with had a lot and they had everything. Now, we didn't really have that much as a family. We had our knickknacks, and the boys had things like a Switch and Lego and stuff like that. It wasn't like we were living in poverty, but the kids around them, a lot of the families where we were fly in, fly out workers to mine sites. So the kids had a lot. And I've always tried to teach austerity to our kids and tried to teach the value of hard work. And they don't just deserve things to our children just because of the way I grew up. I grew up in a family in a place called Swan View, which if anyone knows Western Australia is not it wasn't a nice place back then. I don't know what it's like now, but it wasn't a nice place when I was growing up. My parents divorced really early. So I lived with my mum, who was a single mom, who was also a compulsive gambler. So we didn't have much growing up. We didn't go without food. We had a loving mother and my dad and my mum still talked. But I was the kid at school that had holes in their shoes, Spenless brand shoes with holes in them and things like that. And I like to think it made me pretty resilient and pretty resourceful because when you have nothing, you learn to live with nothing. And I think that's served me well as I've grown up. Now, you can't fake that, right? If you have something, it's hard to fake that you don't have it. And that's what I found with our kids is as much as I tried to teach them austerity, teach them to live within their means and be conservative with their pocket money and things like that, it's hard to fake that. And I remember this very distinctly. So my oldest came home from school one day, and I want to preface this by saying the boys have a Nintendo Switch that they share. Okay, so they have a Switch already. But my oldest boy comes up to me and goes, "Dad, I'd like a Switch." And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to entertain this conversation because I'd like to hear his thought process on like why he thinks he needs one, even though he's got one. And I said, okay, Liam, why do you think you deserve a Switch? And he goes, well, all my friends at school have 2, and so I shouldn't have to share with my brother. That was his reasoning for wanting another Nintendo Switch, is because he thought he deserved one because everyone in his school had one as well. And I was like, Bob, wrong answer, my child. That's exactly what I didn't want to hear. I just said to him, no, you're not getting a second Switch, sorry. And that stuck with me. I was like, what has happened to our children living in Australia? What has happened to our children if they think that they deserve a Switch just by existing on this planet? And I had a bit of an existential crisis at that point. As much as I'm trying to show austerity at home and trying to set the example at home, there's so many external forces that are fundamentally affecting our children in the way they make decisions. And that can be around entitlement. That can be around just the general woke culture in Australia and in the Western world. There's so many external factors that are stronger than my and my wife's parenting because we're not with them all the time. So we were already thinking of going and traveling. All that did is just reinforce that we needed to do it, because I don't want to breed the next generation of entitled children. I didn't grow up like that. My wife didn't grow up like that. And I'd hate to think my kids are running around thinking that because they exist on this planet and they were born in the Western country, they're special. Because as we know, no one is special. You only get things if you work hard and you deserve them. So I really got a little bit disheartened and a little bit disenchanted about the whole living situation we were in. I was already not happy with the situation we're in as it was. And fast forward a year, it just accelerated our move and our trip to Southeast Asia. Now, I want to talk a little bit about selling all of our stuff, because the thing is, our kids were really excited to go traveling. And I think it was a combination of the fact that they were going to start homeschooling so that they get to spend more time at home, and also just an adventure, right? Like, kids always want to go on adventures. And we were excited to do it, so the kids were as well. But the interesting thing is, I didn't realize how adaptable children can be. So we obviously had to sell all of our stuff. There was no use keeping a house worth of stuff in storage. So we started selling bits and pieces. We went to the kids and said, hey, look, guys, you can keep your teddies, you can keep all your sentimental stuff, but do you really need all this Lego? And the kids are like, oh, I still play with it. And they played with it for a couple of days. And then we say, look, do you really need it? If you don't want it, what we can do is sell it, and we can put this money towards something when we go in Asia if you really want it. And once the kids realized that this stuff had value outside of just playing with it, they were wholeheartedly selling everything. I remember when we had 5 garage sales. By far the worst thing about moving over here is having garage sales, by the way. We had 5 garage sales, and the boys were active in selling all their stuff because they'd much rather the money than they did their physical toys, which was nice. It made obviously the whole process a little bit easy, because I hear horror stories of kids being so attached to their toys that they don't play with that they really struggle to get rid of it. Our kids didn't necessarily have that, which was nice, because I really felt like we had some hope. Our parenting style of being a little bit more austere and not being attached to personal belongings, just sentimental things, not having your identity attached to personal belongings, some of that had rubbed off on the kids and it hadn't disappeared yet. So I was pretty reassured about that. But I now want to talk a little bit about what I've seen in our kids and what has changed since we started traveling. And I really think the change in our kids has been pretty profound. And I would highly recommend really considering this if you're sort of deciding whether you want to stay in the keeping up with the Joneses, American, Australian dream type situation, and whether maybe going on a trip, even if it's not to live somewhere else, maybe just going on an extended trip with your children could be something to consider. So the first thing I would say has changed with our kids is that whole entitlement has pretty much disappeared. I think it comes from a combination of the fact that we only have 2 smallish luggage bags, and so there's only so much they can physically carry. So they're prioritizing the sentimental things and the stuff that they enjoy all the time, and they're prioritizing their stuff that they see in stores and stuff less. And a good example of this is like when we first left, for the first like month and a half, we'd go to a toy store in, say, Vietnam or something like that. And the boys were like, can I have that? Can I have that? Can I have that? And we'd obviously say, no, they can't have that. But we had a reason to. The reason was we can't carry it. So if we can't carry it, we can't buy it. And they understood that. Now they get to the point where they can walk straight through a toy store and they just enjoy being in the toy store, enjoy being surrounded by all the items, but don't feel the urge to have to buy it. They can just enjoy looking at it, enjoy pressing the buttons on them while they're in the toy store. And that's enough for it. And that is definitely something that was not the case in Australia. When we lived in Australia, we would have to avoid toy stores because anytime we went in there, the kids were constantly, can we have this? Can we buy this? Can I have this? And it was just overbearing as a parent to have a kid ask you 50 times to buy something in a store when you know they're going to play with it once and never play with it again. So that's been a huge change in the children. I also think it's because they're being exposed to other children in other cultures and they see other kids enjoying just like they don't have as much in some of these Southeast Asian countries. So there's kids just sharing an old basketball, playing basketball and just really enjoying an old basketball. Or there's kids out there just, I remember the other day we were down here at the beach and kids were just, they had this plastic bottle that they filled up with water and they were throwing it at each other. That's the kind of stuff they do to enjoy their time here. And some of that has rubbed off with the boys because they're not surrounded by a whole bunch of kids that think they deserve things because they're on this planet. They're surrounded by a whole bunch of kids that are pragmatic and go, well, I don't have things, I might as well just make my own things and play with the stuff that's around me. So that's starting to rub off with the kids. And this is rubbed off in how they interact with the world too. When we first left, they could die if they didn't get technology. If we were out and about, the first thing they asked for is, oh, can I have a phone? Can I have this? Can I have to entertain themselves? We'd go to a park and they'd just sit there and feel like lost children, like they couldn't play anymore. They lost the ability to play. Fast forward 2 years later, we're over here, we can go to a park and the kids just run off and go do their own thing. They just make their own fun. A lot of it right now is just pretending to play Roblox, but on equipment, like on play equipment, or we'll be in a park and one of them will find a stick and pretend it's like an obstacle course and things like that. So they're using their imagination now, because a lot of the time when you're traveling and when you're living overseas and things like that, there's way more downtime. In Australia, and it was like just busy, 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 busy. So the downtime that they had, they didn't know what to do with it because there was so little of it. Here, when we because our life is a little bit slower now, there's way more downtime. And because there's downtime, and we tell the kids, we're not here to entertain you. Go and find something to do. You're not getting a tablet. You're not getting a phone. Go and find something to do. They really just go off and do their own thing now. And it's really nice to see that in the kids, because that's how I remember growing up. I didn't have anything. And we didn't have technology, first of all. Secondly, I didn't even have any toys. So we'd just go off in the bush and go and find things to break and destroy and things like that. And I'm sure you all did that as well. So it's really nice to see the kids go back to that, because it was really quite scary. Like, I was sitting there, we'd be sitting at a park and there's this awesome playground with swings and everything on it. And the kids would be like, I don't know what to play with. I'm bored. And I'd be sitting there going, just go and play, just go. And they'd just go over there for 2 minutes, then come back and sit next to us and go, what are you doing? Now, we don't even have to ask them. We just get to a playground and they're off. And they know where we are. Obviously, they're conscious of where we are, but like, they just go off and do things just the way kids should. So that's another massive positive of with leaving the West, is that through just the way our life is now, they have more downtime, and they've learned over the last few years on how to use that downtime to be kids, which is really important to do. The next thing that's really changed in our children is how respectful they are to adults and other children, to be fair. So the thing when you're traveling like this is that you meet other kids that are like-minded. You meet other travel families, they're traveling around, you all have similar interests, and the kids all have stories. So when we first started traveling, the kids really struggled to talk to anyone. They would meet other kids and they just wouldn't know what to say to them. Now that they've got a little bit of life experience with traveling and seeing things, the first thing they do when they meet other kids is ask if they play Roblox and play Minecraft. But once that's done, they ask the other kids where they've been, where they've traveled to, and they just ask about their experiences, but at kids level, right? Like, it's the parents are talking about how it was awesome to go and see the orangutans. The kids are like, oh, we got to go on this at the Kalimantan River in Borneo. I got to see a plant eat a fly. That's the highlight of their trip. But they're having those conversations with other kids, and those other kids are doing the same thing because they've got experiences they can share with each other. They're talking at the same level. And it comes with when adults talk to our children. Before we left, our kids would barely talk to an adult. If an adult came up to it and then tried to talk to them, they'd say one word, and then Riley, especially our youngest, would hide behind Pauline. Now, if an adult asks them a question, yeah, look, they're not having full conversations with them, but they definitely answer them. So like when the boys get asked where their favorite place has been, they're like, oh, I liked South Korea. Like, they'll just say where they liked, and then they'll go off and do their own thing. They're not afraid of adults anymore, and they're not afraid of talking to adults. And that's because of the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is how close our families have gotten. I talked about this in other videos, like Australia and the 9-to-5 grind and the keeping up with the Jonas and the American Australian dream was slowly killing our family unit. And I'm very sincere about this. My youngest child was slowly drifting away from me, and that killed me as a dad, because I love my children. I love spending time with them, and I love spending time with my wife. And to know that one of my children was not really feeling the vibe of me really, really upset me. And it shouldn't, because kids are allowed to have their own personalities, but it really hurt me a lot. And what I found by traveling is it gave myself, my oldest child has always been close to me, because when we had him, I wasn't working as much. So I was able to spend a lot of time with him. But my youngest, I was working a lot of hours to pay the bills, and I just didn't spend much time with him in those formative years. And I feel like I've gotten a second chance by traveling, because when you're traveling, you're forced to spend a lot of time together. And that can be a double-edged sword because sometimes you don't want to spend that much time with your kids. I'm grateful for the opportunity and how much time I've been able to spend with my boys because I feel a genuine connection to both of them. And I know they feel a genuine connection to me now. And that goes for my wife as well. The thing is, there's obviously a lot of negatives to traveling and living in another country, obviously, like healthcare and education. You can name a whole bunch of negatives, and people do in the comments, by the way. But there is a whole bunch of positives. And one of the biggest positives is that my kids know my wife and I intimately. They know the ins and outs. They know what we're about. They know our values. We've been spending the last 2 years nonstop with our children. They know us intimately. They know us better than probably most adults do. And I know if I was to die tomorrow, not hope doesn't happen, touch wood, it doesn't happen, obviously. But if I was to like die tomorrow, or even if my wife was to die tomorrow, our kids would have super vivid memories of us. They would know exactly who we are. They would know who their parents were. Because there's a lot of kids out there that they don't get that opportunity. Their parents work really hard to support them, and then the next moment they're gone. And I feel really sorry for those kids because it's not their choice that they didn't get to know their parents. And you see it on TikTok a lot. There's kids that are grown up now in their 20s and they say, the only thing I wished for was to be able to spend more time with my parents. And that's what I talk about when I say that the family's being torn apart by the 9-to-5 grind, is that there's going to be a whole generation of kids that basically brought up by technology and not by their parents. And it just makes me sad. And I'm just so grateful that we had the opportunity to do this with our kids. Regardless, if we go back to Australia tomorrow, the mission's been successful. We've done everything we needed to do. Even if we go back and struggle, I know our kids are going to be better prepared for life having done this trip than not having done it. And honestly, I can rest easy knowing that. And I just wonder how many people out there are just sacrificing their time with their kids with the idea that it will pay off long-term when tomorrow's not guaranteed. There's no box that says you're going to live for 80 years. I could literally walk out tomorrow and get hit by a bus here, which happens regularly in Malaysia. Get hit by a bus or a car or something, and that's it. What will your kids remember you as if you don't go and make these memories with them? Because that's, I know, obviously it'll make any parent upset to think about this stuff, but I know for a fact that my boys will share my values, will share my beliefs, because I've had time to share them with them in situations that aren't forced. When I tell them things like, if they want something and I say to them, no one's going to give that to you unless you ask for it. No one in life is going to give you something unless you ask for it. I get to share that experience with them in practical situations here, because when you live in the West and you're just doing the same thing day in, day out, there's no learning points. There's no like learning points with your kids. And that just means you have less touch points with your kids to pass off those values that you believe they should have. And that is the biggest thing that has happened since we started traveling with our kids and moved overseas and exposed to different things, is we've been in so many foreign scenarios that our kids are incredibly resilient. Our kids are some of the most resilient kids around now because they've been forced to. When you're going to your kids and one of them's saying they got sore legs, but you got 10 minutes to get on a plane and you're running, you go, well, too bad. I'll carry your bag, but you need to run, dude, because we have no choice. They learn to be resilient and go, the world is bigger than me. And I think that's what's missing in the West, is there's a whole bunch of kids that think the world is them when really they've just had no exposure to the outside world. And that honestly is one of the best things about traveling and doing what we've done, is I know that our kids are going to be fantastic world citizens. I know they're going to contribute a lot to this planet, even if we're not here to guide them. They're going to carry the fact that they know they're not the center of the universe, and then hopefully encourage others and lead others to think the same way. And you can't put a price on that. And it will only happen if you expose them to the outside world. So guys, obviously this was a little bit more, like every video I make was a little bit of a rant, but yeah, just think about it. It's been an amazing thing for us, this traveling. And it all works itself out in the end. But hopefully this video gave you a little bit of an insight on what I've seen in our children, because we get asked about that a lot. And guys, like I said, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me what you want to know more of. I'm an open book, as you can see. I'm an open book about what we're doing. And I just love to share our experience because I'm trying to inspire others to do the same thing. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Jimmy, and I'll catch you all on the horizon.